With Deltarune chapters 3, 4, and 5 coming out soon, I wanted to try and predict the locations of the next chapter's Dark Fountains. I'll be going over every chapter that hasn't been released and giving my best guess as to where that chapter's Dark Fountain will take place. Also, before I start, my last Deltarune theory did really well and I really appreciate it. I plan on making more Deltarune theories in the future, so if you have a theory of your own you'd like me to look into, leave it in the comments. I'll be sure to read them. Anyway, I don't feel like making this intro any longer, so let's just start with chapter 3. There's not a whole lot to discuss here, as we literally see Chris open the Dark Fountain in their house at the end of Chapter 2. We know that Chapter 3 will take place in the Dreamer House. One thing I would like to point out is that the previous 2 Dark Fountains were opened up by the Knight, but this one was not, meaning that the Knight is not here to change anything, like when they forced the Spade King into power in Chapter 1. I am very excited to see how this Dark World turns out. Other than that, there's not a whole lot to discuss for Chapter 3. Chapter 4 has 2 possibilities on where a Dark World could be. The most widely accepted theory is that Chapter 4 will take place at the church. This is mostly due to chess theory, which implies that the main antagonist of Chapter 4 will be symbolism for the bishop piece. Chapter 4 will also take place on a Sunday. We know this as Toriel asks Susie to stay overnight at the end of Chapter 2. I doubt that Toriel would let Chris and Susie stay up late on a school night, especially since Toriel is a teacher. This means that Chapter 2 must take place on a Friday. So Chapter 3 will be on a Saturday, Chapter 4 on a Sunday, and so on. I could see our characters going to church at the start of Chapter 4, only for a Dark Fountain to open. I believe that Noelle will return in this chapter, as the Holiday family seems to be very religious. Maybe we can finally meet Mayor Holiday, most likely as an antagonist in this chapter. This would also drag Father Alvin into the Dark World, as he would obviously be present, and he seems to be important. I wouldn't be surprised if Susie is absent, as she doesn't seem like the type of person who would attend church. The other option would be the Holiday House, or Noelle's house. Noelle is definitely going to play a very important role in Deltarune, so having a Dark Fountain at her house makes sense. While I think the church is more likely, any events that could happen in a Dark World at a church could also take place in a religious household. I personally believe that we will get a Dark World in the church and then visit Noelle's house in the Light World. Maybe we'll get a 2-for-1 special, having a Dark World in both the church and the Holiday House during Chapter 4. Chapter 5 is tricky, as we will probably face the Knight in Chapter 5. So wherever the Dark World is would have to have some significance to the Knight. I could go off my last video and say that Rule's card is the Knight, and he'll reopen the Card Kingdom's Dark Fountain, but I don't think that's what's going to happen. For this section, I will list 3 characters that could be the Knight, and where their Dark Fountain would be. The first candidate is Des Holiday, Noelle's missing sister. Des's Dark Fountain has 3 possible locations depending on where the previous chapter's Dark Fountain was. The options are the Holiday House, the church, or the hospital. These 3 locations are very important to the Holiday family. Their house is important for obvious reasons. The church, as again, they seem to be a very religious family. And finally, the hospital, as Rudy's sickness has had a harsh impact on the family. I believe the hospital or the Holiday House are the most likely, as the Holiday family's story can be wrapped up in either of these locations, possibly reuniting them while also explaining Des's disappearance. The next candidate is PAPYRUS, who surprisingly has a lot of evidence for being the Knight. Check out InsanelyADD's video on the topic, as they explain it way better than I could. I think PAPYRUS is the most likely candidate to be the Knight, but where would the Dark Fountain be? His house seems likely, as it's where PAPYRUS spends most of his time, but it just doesn't feel right, to me at least. As if a Dark Fountain is opened in Sans and PAPYRUS' house, then Sans will have to play an important role in the Dark World. And while I would love to see more of Sans, something tells me that Sans is not meant to be an important character in Deltarune. I think that he is truly just meant to be a side character who makes jokes. Maybe I'm wrong, I don't know. The only other location I can think of for PAPYRUS' Dark Fountain would be, strangely enough, Icy's Pisa, as Sans and PAPYRUS have a strange connection to Icy. But other than that, I think PAPYRUS' house would be the best bet. The final candidate is, well, very, very interesting. Gaster has been theorized to be the Knight since day one, and while I dislike the idea, I could see it happening. Gaster is going to play an important role in Deltarune whether we like it or not, and him being the Knight kinda makes sense. I'm quickly going to cram a mini theory in here. In Undertale, Gaster was split across time and space by one of his creations. He technically doesn't exist in the Undertale universe, but what about the Deltarune universe? Characters from Undertale exist in Deltarune and seem to be the same people, but their lives play out differently. Take, for example, Papyrus. In Undertale, his dream is to become a royal guard, and he learns to cook after becoming friends with Undyne. But in Deltarune, the royal guard doesn't exist, so Papyrus would have never had a reason to become friends with Undyne, and we can assume that he never learned to cook either. Now apply this to Gaster. In Undertale, he was a royal scientist who fell into either the core or possibly a different creation of his. But these things don't exist in Deltarune unless it's all in the bunker, which I doubt. The Gaster from the Deltarune universe would have never split across time and space like the Gaster from Undertale, meaning that Gaster is still alive somewhere in Deltarune. Perhaps he's in the bunker, as we hear noise from Entry 17, which is related to Gaster. Anyway, mini theory over. Speaking of the bunker, it's most likely where Gaster's Dark Fountain would be. The bunker will 100% be a location of the Dark World. Plus, no other place is as connected to Gaster as the bunker. So if Gaster does end up being the knight, it's our best bet. Now I know I just talked about the bunker, but I think it's more likely to show up for Chapter 6. Why do I think this? Well, we're going to lose control of Chris. It is inevitable. When we do, we will most likely take control of the vessel we made at the very beginning. It's implied that something happened to Chris when they were younger after entering the bunker, and again, the bunker has strong ties to Gaster. I wouldn't be surprised if a dark fountain is already present in the bunker, and after entering, we lose control of Chris, only to find the vessel. Losing control of Chris would definitely split the party up, with Chris becoming an antagonist to the player. But what about Susie and Rousey? Well, Susie would stay with Chris, as she views Chris as her friend, while Rousey would stay with the player, since he is aware of the player's existence. Plus, Rousey still needs the player to seal the Dark Fountains. The bunker is definitely going to be the location of either Chapter 5 or Chapter 6 when we lose control of Chris, but where does that leave Chapter 7? Chapter 7. The day of Azrael's return home from college. This chapter should be the hardest to predict out of any other chapter, as we have so little information to go off of. But I do have some ideas. Asgore's shop would be the perfect place to wrap up Chris's story. It would also make sense for the two fountains that Chris opens to be connected to the two sides of their family. Azrael would most likely accompany Chris in this chapter. I bet we will get a battle against Azrael, Susie, Asgore, and Chris, either separately or all at once. Although at this point, Chris may have already caused the roaring. Perhaps we get Azrael's help to stop Chris. Flower King is definitely going to be the location of a Dark World. There's just too much going on here for it not to be. And with Azrael coming home and Chris regaining control of themselves, it makes sense for the Dark World to take place in a Dreamer household. Asgore is definitely holding on to the past, and seeing a Dark World themed around the Dreamer family's past and struggles would be really cool. We already had a Dark World in Chris's house, so Flower King is the only other option. Also, while I try to avoid using Undertale as evidence for Deltarune, Asgore's area is the final area in Undertale, so I could see the same thing happen in Deltarune. Now, while I believe that Flower King makes the most sense for Chapter 7's Dark World, there is one other place it could be. We've already had Dark World locations related to Chris and Noelle, but we have one more Lightner that hasn't had a Dark World, and that's Susie. Susie is arguably the most important character in Deltarune, and at least one Dark World needs to revolve around her. This would let us see what her home life is like, if she even has one. Many people speculate that Susie is homeless or is mistreated at home, which explains some of her behavior. Always being hungry, not contacting her parents at the end of Chapter 2, and how scared she is of Toriel, who's a parental figure. Perhaps Susie is the one to open this Dark Fountain. I would love to see Susie's situation addressed. Toby Fox has said that Deltarune will only have one ending, and that our choices don't matter. Maybe the ending will be Chris helping Susie confront whatever's going on in her life. No matter what choice we, the player, make, won't change the ending. Once we lose control of the main characters, the ending is up to them. At the end of the day, it's nearly impossible to predict where Deltarune is going, as we only have 2 out of 7 chapters. I'm most confident that we will have a Dark Fountain in the church and the bunker. the two most obvious places. Other than that, it's all just speculation and guesses. By the time Chapter 3, 4, and 5 come out, it will probably be easier to predict the rest of the game, but with what little we have right now, all we can do is take shots in the dark. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I'd love to hear your thoughts as well. Put your own theories in the comments and I'll look into them. Maybe subscribe or something, I don't know. Bye.